Welcome everybody to episode 32 of our podcast, where we discuss people that had encounters with Jesus while he was here on earth. And I think by now people would realize that we're starting going through people from the beginning of Jesus' ministry up to the end. So we've just finished now with Pilate and Herod and those guys, and now we get to the place where Jesus is being crucified, and there's two guys next to him, and that's the guys that in Luke 23. Those are the guys we're talking about today.
And two bad guys.
Two bad guys.
Let's call it those things. Two bad guys whose destinies are going to end very differently because of the way they recognize grace and the way they embrace grace. And obviously in the coming weeks we'll speak about a whole bunch of other characters. But like you said, we're right here in this time where these two people, and you wonder if they knew about Jesus, because there were numerous other people that knew about Jesus in the surrounding areas, and they'd possibly heard about him, but they were bad people. And
So Gerald, you've been to the place actually where Jesus was crucified, and it wasn't a pleasant time being there. It was a dark moment. You can see I can just imagine the crowd standing around them, still throwing slurs at Jesus, cursing at him, telling him still to save himself, and going on. And then all of a sudden, these two guys join in, even with the crowd.
Yeah, listen, I'm determined to have you walk those streets one day. I don't think in all my travels there's a place that has captivated my imagination like Israel. Honestly, for those people that are watching out there, I cannot encourage people enough to make that trip. Maybe this has really got nothing to do with the message, but it's important that people know that whatever you do, don't climb on a plane and go to Israel yourself and think you're going to see it all. It's the one place that you should genuinely travel within a organized group, because you got the tour guides and you got people that are knowledgeable, so you can actually get the real value of the trip. Okay, but that said, I want to agree with you. I think what disturbs me about these two guys that are put on the cross is they're on a cross, but they haven't lost their voice. And I think that's something we could think about right now today as well, is that what are you going to do with your voice? How are you going to use those moments when you're close to the Master? And here's these other people walking past Jesus, insulting him. And I think to myself about those people as well. We don't necessarily have names of them. We don't have reference to Jesus encountering them. But they had an opportunity. There were people that were walking past, and they could have just shown him grace. They could have gone to give him a sip of water, but no, they got to go and take cheap wine, put it on a cloth and throw it into his mouth. They could have walked past there, and they could have looked up to him and said, Jesus, listen here, you haven't got a clue who I am, but I just want you to know what these guys are doing is just crazy. I mean, I can't think that they let Barabbas go, and you are. I want you to know that, I'm sorry about this. No, we don't read nothing like that, just insults. And those people live with those insults forever. But again, as society is, when insults start flowing, other people start to get courage. And so these two guys are on a cross, and they're adopting the courage of other people's insults. Ryno, we see that happen in this lifetime as well, specifically in this social media world. Someone starts to throw insults, and that starts to make a whole other crowd courageous to throw insults as well. But in the midst of this, one of these bad men, looks and he reads to the Son, and he says, I wonder if we're all getting this wrong. Is there not a kingdom in this man? And then he starts a conversation with Jesus. And that in itself is genuinely powerful.
So, like we said earlier, this man that actually started the conversation with Jesus was one of the guys also on his dying bed, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Throwing insults at Jesus, and then all of a sudden have a change of heart. And we all are going to get to that place one day where we have to confront the truth of death, and where we cross over into eternity. And he starts off and he asks Jesus to think of him. Yeah. And I think we've heard this so many times, and like even Jesus being probably the most vulnerable place of his lifetime. And I don't think it's the cross that was it, but having the world's shame on him and sin on him. So it's not just the cross. I don't think death didn't have a hold on him. But being at that place and then still making time to actually think of this guy and ministering to him.
This is the Jesus that I've fallen in love with over this podcast time of reading. Just something that maybe we can think about as well, myself and you and those that are listening over here. Just think about how many people have insulted Jesus with their lives, their lifestyles, their attitudes, possibly their words. And they have this moment to find the grace, but they can't actually forgive themselves. Just think about how this guy must have stumbled over his words. Yeah, he reckons, listen, I'm on my last. But publicly, he says to Jesus, remember me. Now, you might want to suggest, and others might suggest it was something that was just whispered, close on. I suspect not. I suspect the crosses were a little distance from each other. Exactly. That's the point. And I'm thinking he probably said, hey, instead of just saying, hey, just remember me. It was more a thing, Jesus, listen, I get it. I think the people are wrong. Do me a favor, remember me. And I just want to encourage myself. I want to encourage you. I want to encourage those that are listening. Don't walk away from the grace of God just because you're filled with shame of in the past ignoring the grace of God. Sometimes we get it wrong. And you've got to be able to walk back and say, you know what? I walked away from the grace of God. I walked away from the conversation I could have had with God. I walked away from the purpose of God. But I recognize, like this man on the cross, that if I come back and I ask you, you're the God that will respond. And Jesus does respond. Do you remember the words he says?
I'll think of you. You'll walk with me in paradise. Yeah, today. That's where we'll be.
And that is just another thing about Jesus, how he can move on. Yeah. He moves on. He says, all right, got you.
No worries.
We're moving on.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful story of grace. And as much as I sit and think about this man, my real heart breaks for the other man on the cross, who realizes in one moment he lost an opportunity to be redeemed. Yeah. And that would be what I'm encouraging people to do, be redeemed.
So just wrapping this conversation up.
I think for me, I meet too many people that genuinely don't believe God can forgive them. I meet enough people who believe He's God, but just not sure He can be God for them. Yeah. Marriage falls apart, or that they've done things wrong. They got it wrong, and they can't seem to think. They think it disqualifies them from the conversation with God. And that's all I would plead with everyone watching and with yourself and those that are listening on radio. Don't think your past or your present disqualifies you from the conversation you might have with God. Because in one moment, that grace can redeem you.
Yeah, agree 100%. So that's it from us. God's grace is bigger than what you could ever imagine. Absolutely. I think we have this perception, if we think of grace, it's like a grain of sand, but God's grace is like the whole Sahara Desert. It's more than enough for us. And if you really have a need to go and talk to Him, do it. Even if it's one of the last things you ever do, it's never too late to make a change in your life and talk to God. From our side, nothing but love.
Nothing but love, friends.
Let it be.